We hear about legal loopholes all the time, right? But today we're really diving into one that I think is especially relevant, especially these days. Workers' rights,
Right.
specifically in the EU. We're digging into this article from the Danish Confederation of Trade Unions,
Okay.
also known as FH. And it uncovers some, well, I don't want to say shocking, but some surprising ways that companies are kind of, I don't know, bending the rules a bit when it comes to temporary workers.
Yeah, and what's really interesting here is that it's not even about, like, finding some obscure loophole in the law.
Right.
It's often about exploiting the very definition of temporary work.
It's really just taking that word and stretching it as far as it could possibly go.
Yeah.
So companies are essentially, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like they're using this label of temp to get around to kind of sidestep all those standard employee benefits and protections, things that we think of as just standard, like paid time off, sick leave, and I mean, even job security, right? This isn't just some abstract concept, though, because the article highlights some really eye-opening examples.
Yeah, the Siemens case in Denmark is a perfect example, I think.
Okay.
Here you have, a multinational giant
Huge company.
using hundreds of temp workers as, like, a core part of their workforce. You'd think, a company that size
Right.
could afford to hire a few full-time employees.
You would think so.
Yeah.
It's like they were permanent temps.
Yeah, exactly.
And as if that weren't bad enough, the article also calls out the Danish Business Authority. So this is their own government.
Yeah.
And they dismissed a temp worker because she was pregnant.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, that's just, they wouldn't have been able to do that legally if she were a full-time employee.
Exactly. It really exposes the vulnerability
Yeah.
of workers who are left in this, like, perpetual state of temporary status.
So, like, they're using this whole temp classification as a way to get around those stricter labor laws
Yeah.
that are designed to protect pregnant employees.
Right. And this situation actually led to a landmark ruling by the EU court. But, yeah, this is really being hailed as a major, major victory for workers' rights in the EU.
Okay, so walk me through this.
Right.
What makes this ruling so significant?
So essentially, the EU court, they saw what was happening
Yeah.
with companies using, these back-to-back long-term temp contracts
Right.
as a way to just get around their legal obligations to their employees.
Right.
And they basically just said, enough.
No more loopholes.
Exactly, no more loopholes. The court ruled that member states, they can't just turn a blind eye to this anymore.
Okay.
They have to take concrete steps to prevent companies from abusing these temp contracts.
So what does that look like in practice? What kind of measures are we talking about here?
So that's where the Temporary Agency Work Directive comes in.
Okay.
It's a piece of EU legislation
Hmm.
that sets out the ground rules for, you guessed it, temporary agency work.
I'm starting to see where this is going, yeah.
Right. So this directive, it includes things like, ensuring that temps have the same basic working and employment conditions
Okay.
as permanent employees in the same company.
Gotcha.
And it sets limits on how long a temp assignment can last.
Which companies were essentially finding ways to circumvent?
Precisely. This new ruling, it puts teeth into those rules.
Mhm.
It makes it crystal clear that companies can't just hide behind these temp agencies
Yeah.
to avoid their responsibilities.
Right.
They're going to have to provide their workforce with proper benefits and protections, whether those workers are hired directly or through an agency.
Okay, wow. This isn't just some slap on the wrist.
No.
This has the potential to reshape how companies approach their entire, workforce strategy.
Absolutely, and it's a strong signal that the EU is committed to fair and ethical labor practices,
Yeah.
across the board.
Across the board.
They're really grasp the weight of this. Let's delve into the wording
Okay.
of the ruling itself. It states, and I'm paraphrasing the legal jargon here a bit,
Sure.
it says member states must take appropriate measures to prevent abuse consisting of successive assignments under temporary agency work, the purpose of which was circumvent the provisions of the Temporary Agency Work Directive.
Wow. They really spelled it out for them, didn't they?
Yeah, they weren't messing around.
So it's not just about protecting workers' rights in theory.
Mm-hmm.
It's about making sure those rights are actually upheld in practice.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
this isn't just about those individual workers,
Right.
caught in the temp trap.
Right. Right.
This has the potential to impact entire industries,
Okay.
especially those that are heavily reliant on temp labor.
Like the construction industry, for example.
Exactly. Remember that Copenhagen Metro City Ring project we mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
Massive undertaking, heavily reliant on you guess it, temporary workers.
Right.
This ruling could drastically change labor practices on projects like that moving forward.
It's like this ruling is sending ripples throughout the entire EU economy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what does this actually mean for companies and workers on the ground? What are the tangible effects of this landmark decision? So we're not just talking about like hypothetical changes here, right? This isn't just on
Yeah.
paper. This ruling has some real teeth to it.
Oh, absolutely.
What happens to companies that try to just, keep doing what they're doing, try to skirt these new regulations?
Yeah, it's definitely not going to be business as usual. That's for sure. They could be facing some serious consequences. We
Huh?
could see some hefty fines, lawsuits from workers, even, just reputational damage
Yeah.
that could impact their business.
It's a whole new ballgame for these companies operating in the EU.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to adapt or face the music, as they say.
Yeah.
But what does this mean, this kind of shift? What does it mean for workers?
Yeah.
Especially those who are, they've been stuck in this cycle of short-term temp contracts.
Yeah, for those workers, this ruling is huge. I'd say it's a breath of fresh air because it offers them something that they've been, I think, longing for, which is a sense of security.
Right, stability.
Stability, yeah. Knowing you have rights, you have protections in place, your job isn't going to just vanish overnight. That can be life-changing for a lot of people.
Absolutely. It levels the playing field a bit, gives them a real seat at the table. It says, you're not just a temporary fixture here. You're a valuable member of this workforce.
Precisely. And that shift in perspective, I think, from both, employers and employees
Yeah.
could have a sort of a ripple effect throughout entire industries.
Okay.
We could see improvements in working conditions, better benefits, even just more opportunities for career advancement.
Right. Which can be really hard to do when you're just bouncing between temp contracts.
Exactly.
So to wrap all of this up, this EU ruling, it's a major victory for workers' rights. It slams the door on these legal loopholes that companies have been exploiting, for years, really. And it sets a really powerful precedent, I think, for fair and ethical labor practices, regardless of how you're employed. But, it makes you wonder, this is happening in the EU.
Hey.
What about temporary workers in other parts of the world?
Yeah.
Are there similar protections in place? Are we having these conversations elsewhere?
That's the million-dollar question, I think. This ruling, it could be a wake-up call
Right.
for other countries to reassess their own labor laws, consider putting in place some stronger protections for temporary workers.
It's a conversation that needs to happen on a global scale because everyone deserves a fair chance at a decent job, no matter how they're employed. And on that note, that's our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us.